Okay? Okay. This is the August 10th Policy Committee meeting. It's kind of an emergency meeting because there's something we have to accomplish this week that came to us very late. So we're only dealing with the one issue tonight. At this time, has the meeting been properly posted, Lynn?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. We have no citizens here to speak with us. We have no bright lights. We do not have action on minutes. Take place next week. Which brings us to our purpose in being here, which is an action item on a new policy 2266, Nondiscrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. And there's a little recent history on this that, Joe, you're going to share with us?
Sure. Yeah, so this, the Department of Education made a change to the Title IX procedures, and they have said that the school districts need to make change, both public K-12 public entities and colleges and universities, in how they treat Title IX. And so we were made aware of this back in, I want to say April or May. Please correct my memory. With coronavirus is, kind of all over the place. I think we had anticipated it coming. And so the change came, and they gave us a deadline of August the 14th to make sure that this was implemented. We work with Neola, and Neola works with the Office of Civil Rights when they draft civil rights type policies. And so Neola got us the policy in July, sometime in July. I think it was early to mid-July the first time around, where we got the template, and that template had a number of choices. And so we worked with our legal counsel on making the selections, and we'll go through the policy tonight, and I'll show you what we selected and why. We finally got that updated policy back right at the end of July. It was like July 29th, 30th, 31st, somewhere in there, where we had the policy that we have in front of you tonight for consideration. And then I was on vacation last week, and so tonight was the first night we could get together for the policy committee. I do apologize the late timing of it, but there were a number of factors that were outside of our control if we wanted to do this and do it well. And so what we bring forward to you tonight is policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education, education programs or activities. This is a new policy. So this would be a new policy on the books. We are accustomed to using for a new policy, we would do 2 readings at committee and 2 readings at the full board, but given the timing of it and the legal connection, we're going to have to request that we waive the 2 reading practice tonight and then at the board for approval. What I'd like to go through for you, though, is the policy. So if we were to look at this, it's numbered for you, and I'll refer to it on page numbers here. That when you look at this, you can see that there are choices, and those choices, the ones that we have selected, we worked again in concert with legal counsel to make these decisions. And so the first selection that we had is under coverage. And it says, this policy does not apply to sexual harassment that occurs off school grounds in a private setting and outside of the scope of the Board of Education's program activities. Such sexual misconduct or sexual activity may be prohibited by the Student Code of Conduct if committed by a student, or by board policies and administrative guidelines, applicable state and federal laws. So this is what we've selected, and or employee administrator handbooks if committed by an employee. So we added into this language the employee handbooks for employees. In the next paragraph, sexual harassment that occurs outside the geographic boundaries of the United States is governed by the Student Code of Conduct if committed by a student. So please think of field trips abroad, should we send students abroad, or by other applicable board policies and administrative guidelines, applicable state or federal laws, and employee administrator handbooks. So if we have chaperones and such that have gone to Europe on a vacation, the Title IX would not apply to something that happened in a foreign country. However, we have other things employee handbooks, other policies, there are laws then that we could apply, but it wouldn't be Title IX. So I want to draw your attention to that if something happened outside, it would not be a violation of Title IX, but we would have ways to administer discipline should we need to. On page 2, we accepted the language that Neola brought forward. I think it's important for the committee to know what constitutes sexual assault. That is item C, given what is in there. I'm not going to read all of those items. You can do that, and the viewers can read it once it's posted to our website. But please note that we did make a selection by item G. We added that in there. Other sexual contact includes the intentional emission of bodily fluids on the complainant or at the direction of the respondent for the purposes of sexual gratification as defined. So that is the one area that we have chosen to add. We wanted to make sure that our policy did cover all possible acts of assault. Please know that we do not investigate crimes as a school district. We investigate policy violations, and anything that would constitute a crime, we would be referring to law enforcement. So we also have our mandatory reporting duties, and we have our responsibility to notify law enforcement if we think a crime has been committed. So please know that this is just a policy that we would be looking at, and we would be entertaining it there. If you go over to page 3, as part of this, there's a number of areas, there's terms that you can see in there, complainant, respondent, formal complainant. And so you get some definitions here and what they mean. Under supportive measures, we did make the election to supportive measures may include counseling, extension of deadlines or other course-related adjustments, modifications of work or class schedules, school campus escort services, mutual restrictions of contact between parties, changes in work locations, leave of absence, increased security and monitoring of certain areas of the campus, and then a referral to the employee assistant program or other measures. We do have an EAP. We just wanted to make sure that we would be offering that to a victim if needed. We are designating as a school district Sharon Thiede to be our Title IX coordinator. And there are some reasons for this. In our other policies that deal with harassment and discrimination, both Sharon and I are compliance officers. Under this policy, there are a number of steps that make this different from an investigative standpoint than what the other policies do. And so in this policy, we have people who are investigators. Our principals will be investigators. We have district office administrators who will be investigators. We have a coordinator who's Sharon Thiede. She's kind of the resource for everybody. She's the person who will make sure that we've implemented the policy appropriately. She's the person who will take care, make sure that we have public notifications. And then she will also advise when schools have to deal with a sexual harassment situation. She has to be separate from a decision maker. And I will be the decision maker then for the district. So I will review the investigation and I will issue a decision on that. Dr. Siebert will be the appeals person. So you have to have a coordinator, you have to have investigators, a coordinator, a decision maker, and an appeals person. And so that's how that hierarchy will go there. That's why you just see Sharon listed as a coordinator in this. Going forward, in the policy on page 5, you can see in there, there's not much change to what was presented to us other than the coordinator is in the singular instead of the plural. But it does talk about the reporting procedures for sexual discrimination and harassment. If you go to page 6, within this policy, there are components that so differ from how we handle other forms of harassment and discrimination. when you start looking at timelines, when you start looking at the information that we need to provide to both parties, this policy really differs. And so you start to see that in this page as we go forward. We have to notify everybody in writing who we are going to interview as part of the investigation. Whereas with other ones, if it was a student situation, you may just call them in. We got to talk to you about, this, that, and the other thing. This then has to be in writing, the time and the date of the investigation. If you forward ahead, go ahead.
So what does that mean? Like you'd have to send them a certified letter that they're going to be interviewed? Or?
Something in writing, so email, letter, something that would constitute written notification. Email is an acceptable form of that email communication. Otherwise, it would be a letter, to the family. If they had an attorney, representing, then we'd have the attorney there too.
Something about that sounds familiar. Did we have recently, in one of our other policies, did we have something where we had to or had to notify somebody in writing about?
There's timelines around, in recent years when we've reviewed our bullying policy and when we've reviewed our harassment and discrimination, other harassment and discrimination policies, the written notices were in there.
Okay.
But that was not as prescribed as it is in here.
Okay.
And it wasn't as stringent as what it is in here.
Okay.
If you look on page 7, upon receipt of formal complaint, the Title IX coordinator will provide a written notice of the following to the parties who are known. We have to provide the board grievance process. We have to notice the allegations of misconduct, so we have to be clear with the person as to why we are investigating. We need to make sure that we are starting this from presumed innocence. Include a statement that the respondent is presumed not responsible for the alleged conduct, and that a determination regarding responsibility will be made at the conclusion of the grievance process. Inform the parties that they may have an advisor of their choice who may be but is not required to be an attorney and may inspect and review evidence. And then this is where we made some selections. Item 3, inform the parties of any provision of the student code of conduct, this policy, and or the employee handbook that prohibits knowingly making false statements or knowing submitting false information during the grievance process. So again, we're being very clear. We're covering all those areas with this policy. Just trying to point the highlights out to you. This is a very lengthy, very Office of Civil Rights. What I'd like you to note on page 8, the selection that we made, the informal resolution process is not available to resolve allegations involving a sexual assault involving a student complainant and a student respondent. So for sexual harassment, we do have an informal resolution process that can be used, which is different than what was in the past. We can't require that somebody participate in an informal resolution, but if somebody wishes to participate in informal resolution, we have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
We are using the standard that we're using is the preponderance of evidence standard. So do we have enough evidence to show that something did happen or did not happen?
You're number 9 now?
We are on page 8 still, under investigation
I see
of a
it. I
formal
see it.
complaint. We had to make a decision on what standard, and schools generally use a preponderance of evidence standard. So this is what was recommended to us to use. It's something that we're all very familiar with when doing an investigation. On page 9, I'd like to point out to you that prior to the completion of the investigative report, the investigator will send to each party and the party's advisors, again, this is something new, if any, the evidence subject to the inspection and review in an electronic format or hard copy, and the parties will have at least 10 days to submit a written response, which the investigator will consider prior to the completion of the investigation report. So any evidence, if I'm the investigator, any evidence that I collect, be it video evidence, emails, text messages, screenshots from social media, whatever it might be, the results of my interviews, so on and so forth, I have to submit that to both parties and then give the rationale as to, did it meet the standard or did it not meet the standard? Am I using it? Am I not using it? And then within 10 calendar days, they have the opportunity to submit in writing to me a response to that before my investigation is complete. And so that is new for our administrators when they conduct their investigations. Determination regarding responsibility. The decision makers will issue a written determination regarding responsibility. To reach this determination, the decision maker must apply the preponderance of evidence standard. The written determinations will include the following content. Identification of the allegations potentially constituting sexual harassment pursuant to the policy. A description of the procedural steps taken from the receipt of the formal complaint through the determination, including any notification to the parties, findings of facts supporting the determination, conclusions regarding the application of the applicable code of conduct to the facts, a statement of and rationale for the results to each allegation, and the procedures and permissible basis for the complainant and the respondent to appeal. So, again, this is something that's a little bit more involved than what we have used in the past. Yes, sir.
That's an interesting point. This is a very robust policy.
Yeah.
Yet many of these things must have been in place someplace. And Lynn told me that they were scattered around.
Yeah, we have a harassment and discrimination policy that has the criteria for investigating harassment and discrimination in the district in it.
Okay.
This goes much further
Yes.
than that. This law or this change to the law is currently being challenged in the court. The ACLU has filed a challenge to this, as have many states have challenged this. On a number of levels. Some states have challenged it on the fact that they're trying to implement this during a pandemic, and schools just can't prioritize this right now. I think the ACLU is challenging it on the basis that it puts the victim in a very difficult position when making a complaint. But this is the current law. Just to give you some idea, we could have our board meeting on Wednesday. This thing could get passed on Wednesday. It needs to be on the books by Friday to keep us compliant. But on Thursday, the law could change. They could issue a stay. So I bring it to you as something that we need to do.
Dan?
Does it impact the federal funding if it's not in place by the 14th as directed?
It could. It could. It would be rare that would happen. But we would be at a substantial disadvantage as a school district if we didn't have it on the books by the time that the students start, which is the reason. And again, I apologize for the timing of it. It was out of my control. We tried to get it in front of you as quickly as we could.
We're used to that.
Yeah. If you go to page 10. Disciplinary sanctions, consequences may be imposed on an employee respondent who was determined responsible for violating this policy, including but not limited to oral or written warning, written reprimands, performance improvement plan, required counseling, required training or education, demotion, suspension with pay, suspension without pay, termination, and any other sanction authorized by any applicable employee or administrator handbook. So again, this policy applies to students and staff. So we want to make sure that we understand that this is an all-encompassing policy. This section refers to behavior conducted by an employee. You do see a number of selections there for us to pick. And I can say that we would have a wide range of things that could constitute sexual harassment. And that's why we would want to have a degree, a range of discipline that we could potentially use. Some may just go straight to termination if it's bad. Some stuff may be, done, in a, I don't want to say out of ignorance, but, we go through the investigation and we determine that there's a written warning that's needed, so we would want to have the latitude under this policy to handle all forms of discipline with staff. The following disciplinary sanctions consequences may be proposed on a non-student, non-employee member of the school district community or a third party determined. So again, like if a parent were to show up on the school grounds or one of our vendors were to do something, we could use an oral written warning, suspension, termination, cancellation of the board's contract, mandatory monitoring of the third party while on school property, restrictions, prohibitions on the third party's ability to be on school property, and any combination of the same. So we could do all of it or any one of those. We have some latitude. And again, this was vetted by our attorneys to give us, sound guidance on how we would want to implement it. We didn't pick this as administrators, although we do support what their recommendations are. On to page 11. The complainants may not challenge the ultimate disciplinary sanction consequence that is opposed. So we have the ability to say that after all this happens, so I guess I'll go up to the top of the page. Both parties have the right to file an appeal from a determination regarding responsibility from the Title IX coordinator's dismissal of a formal complaint or any allegations therein on the following basis. Procedural irregularity that affected the outcome of the matter. New evidence that was not reasonably available at the time of the determination. The Title IX coordinator, investigators, or decision makers had a conflict of interest or bias for or against the complainants or respondents or the individual complainant or respondent that affected the outcome of the matter. But if it's not one of those three things, the complainant may not challenge the ultimate disciplinary sanctions. And again, recommended and reviewed by our attorneys who would be supporting us if challenged. If you go down to the middle of the page, specifically the appealing party must submit with notice of appeal a written statement challenging the determination of responsibility. The non-appealing party shall have up to 5 days after the receipt of the appealing party's written statement to submit his or her written statement in support of the determination of responsibility. The decision makers for the appeal shall issue a written decision describing the results of the appeal. So that goes on to say the written decision will be issued within 5 days. So after they get the letters, the written statements, they have 5 days to issue a written decision. The determination of responsibility associated with a formal complaint, including any recommendations for remedies, disciplinary sanctions, becomes final when the time for appealing an appeal has passed, or if an appeal is filed at the point when the decision makers for the appeal's decision is delivered to the complainant and the respondent. No further review beyond the appeal is permitted.
That ends.
That is it. Sure, I point out all of the selections that we've made. The district will make its training materials publicly available on its website. If a person is unable to access the website, the coordinator will make training materials available upon request. So by the end of the week, the document that you have next to you there, the PowerPoint, that will be on our website. So if the public has any questions, that is our training material. Discretion and application, the board retains, and so this is on page 13, the board retains the discretion to interpret and apply the policy in a manner that is clear, that it is not clearly unreasonable, even if the board's interpretation or application differs with the interpretation of any specific complainant and respondent. Despite the board's reasonable efforts to anticipate all eventualities in drafting this policy, it is possible unanticipated or extraordinary circumstances may not be specifically or reasonably addressed by the express policy language, in which case the board retains the discretion to respond to the unanticipated or extraordinary circumstances in a way that is not clearly unreasonable. So this gives the board the ability to address situations that were not anticipated when you pass the policy. You have the flexibility to do what you need as a board.
A little bit of latitude.
A little bit of latitude. So with that, that is the rather lengthy policy. We do have administrative guidelines for that policy. That, you know, they used to be Todd's rules. I'll be working with Dr. Siebert on those. They are in draft form right now. I'll be making my recommendation after Wednesday, should the board.
Okay.
But I do strongly request that it be approved. I will, you know, freely admit that the policy, like I said before, could be challenged in court and the state could put on it on Thursday. With a new administration, should one show up in the, you know, in Washington DC, they appoint a new Secretary of Education, that could do away with this Title IX language. So just know that it could be, you know, something that is delayed, implemented, and carried forward for the foreseeable future. It could be delayed, implemented, and overturned during an election year. So I offer that to you guys just in full disclosure that I may be back in, you know, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months with, you know, something that says we need to take this off the books. It's that, all that stuff for a policy like this is out of my hands.
As of now, we have to have it done.
We do have to have it done.
It's,
It did get down to crunch time when it came down to getting the policy, getting it reviewed, making sure it's in fact what we should be doing as a district.
now, our obligation tonight is to, we need to have a waiver on our normal way of doing the business,
Yes.
so we can take committee action on it tonight.
Yep.
We had a reading, so we're looking for a motion to allow us to go directly to an action item tonight, and then tomorrow, or Wednesday night, we'll do the same thing at the board meeting.
Yep. So it'd be a motion to waive the 2 reading requirement
Right.
at committee, and then on Wednesday, it would be a motion to
Actually, I
waive
will
the 2.
make the motion to waive the 2 reading obligation before action, and that we proceed as a committee tonight. So I'd like to move for that. I'm moving.
You're moving, I'm seconding, okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Lynn, you get that?
Yes.
Thank you. I know that was rather quick. So now we would be, our next step in this process, and if you're listening to this out there, it gets a little bit complicated, but we want to stay with our rules. Our next step in this process is for the committee to approve this, to go to the board August 12th.
Yep.
You want to make that?
I move approval of the new policy 2266, non-discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs or activities, you know, to be forwarded to the board
Yeah.
for our meeting on Wednesday.
And I'll second that. Any further discussion on that part of it? Seeing none, all in favor of approving that, say aye. Aye. Opposed? 2-0, Lynn. Thank you. Whew.
And thank you for your flexibility coming together tonight.
We've had to deal with a lot of flexibility lately. I appreciate that, Joe, and I appreciate your rundown on it. It helps. I don't know how much detail we're going to have to deliver on Wednesday night, but we may have some questions as well, or maybe you can summarize it somehow.
I wonder what order we were in on Wednesday, because we could be talking about it at about 11 o'clock, so.
I did, yeah, where are we on the list? About
I don't know.
2/3 of the way through. I looked at it
I'd have to look at the agenda.
right here.
Kind of early on.
Are we?
Well, yeah, it's, actually,
Are we before or after the reopening discussion?
oh, that's in the first part.
Okay.
The reopening is in the first part. Then consent agenda, then once we get into the committee, it's government, safety and security, no action item, human resources, no action item, and policy.
So I won't do an over-under on the time we'll be talking about this, but I'll make sure I'm prepared to give some details.
Well, the other policy, we will be dealing with
Others.
about a dozen policies here that we are bringing forward that we've already read and approved at committee. And I asked Lynn to set that up as a single approval if we have to extract anything. Is that correct, Lynn? So if we'd be looking for one motion for all, whatever there are, 13, I think, or something like that here. So we'll be the big guys Wednesday night,
Everything's relative.
when it comes to committees at least. Anything else?
I
Joe,
do not
anything
have
else?
anything else tonight. Lynn and I do, at the end of the month, have a meeting with Richard to take on another series of policy revisions. And we'll bring those to you.
Well, we will be still having a policy committee meeting on the, what is it, 18th? So we do have a meeting, and are we going to, as long as we're checking, Wednesday? You and I usually.
Tuesday the 18th.
I know, but usually we have a meeting, the three of us, to prepare for the committee meeting.
Yeah, that's scheduled for, I think, Wednesday of this week.
We're on, okay.
We're good.
Just clearing stuff up on the calendar. I think with that, are we ready for ending?
I am.
Okay,
Sure.
meeting is over. Thank you.